Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be going over all of the books I read in the first quarter of 2021. Again. So if you can't tell from the intro clip, I am a bit salty right now. I recorded this entire wrap-up about 2 days ago, and when I went to go edit the footage, I realized that I hadn't had my mic plugged in all the way. So there was no sound to the video. But anyway, the show must go on. So here we are, filming again. So I'll start with my overall stat. I'll put up my list and maybe a bit of my spreadsheet up here as well. So I read 13 books in the first quarter of 2020, which means I'm on track to definitely exceed my goal of 30 books. Hopefully somewhere in the 50 to 60 range. I have a new kind of internal forecasted goal of 60. We'll see if I get there or not. I'm gonna leave my Goodreads goal at 30. Overall, I read 4,240 pages. I spent a total of $33.42 on the books I read this quarter. And with the books I borrowed from the library, I saved about $114. According to my rating system, I had about a 4.1 star average over the entire quarter, which feels about right. I really enjoyed a lot of the books I read this last few months, so I feel good about that number. I will throw up a picture of my Gantt chart that I made in Google Sheets. The orange is physical books or ebooks, and the purple is audiobooks that I listen to. So you can see I've had, a pretty good kind of sequential reading in this last quarter. The kind of big bar you see, My Life in France, I'll talk about that a little bit more in the book by book wrap up, but this is a audiobook that my partner and I listened to together, so I could only listen to it when he and I were both in the car going somewhere or driving to go do something, so that's why it took a little bit longer to get through. Here you can see my percent genre read for the first quarter. I break it down by page length, so a longer book in one genre will count heavier than a shorter book in another genre, and I'd really like to start going by word count as opposed to page count, because page count can vary so wildly. But the only thing that's holding me back is in the last quarter, I counted my reread of the webcomic Lore Olympus season 1 as something I read, because it is something I read. But I don't know how to really get a word count for that. So I don't know. If anybody has any thoughts, let me know. But so far, this is the best I can do by page count. So I'll have my 2021, I have my 2021 up to date here. I'll also throw up my 2020 genre read just for comparison's sake. I mean, I think it's fairly interesting that my breakdown is so much different than it was from last year, but it's still pretty early in the year, so that could easily change over the course of the year. I'll also throw up my reading rate pivot table. I just think it's kind of interesting. Definitely, I read my fantasy books really quick. As you can see, fantasy was the fastest for me, but that's pretty heavily weighted by the fact that I counted Lore Olympus as fantasy. I also put Midnight Library in as fantasy, but I don't really know where best to fit that. I don't really have a general fiction category yet, because I don't typically read just general contemporary fiction. I just don't. So I don't know, that might change as I read more books this year and alter some of my genre picks. Overall, I had a reading rate of about 32 pages per day, which I'm pretty happy with. I think that means I'm typically dedicating a half hour to 45 minutes a day to reading, which again, I'm happy with. As compared to last year, I'm pretty much right in there. 29 pages per day as opposed to the almost 33 pages per day I had this year. At the end of the year, I might do some statistical testing to see if I really did read more pages this year as opposed to last year, just for curiosity's sake. And then I think last thing I want to hit on is my page length histogram. So as you can see, it's mostly centered around that 350 page mark, with the actual mean being 326 pages, the median being 342. So you can see the mean is being a little bit weighted by that tail off to the left there. And then I will also throw up my histogram from 2020. The mean there is 420, so the mean has significantly dropped this year. I'm reading a lot shorter books, and as you can see, I have the opposite tailing issue where my tail goes to much longer books. So I think that's about all I have for stats. So I will now move on to my book by book breakdown. So I'm going to start with 2 books that I actually read in 2020, but I just never got them filmed in a wrap up. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I enjoyed this. This was about like a 3.5 for me. I can definitely see why people like it so much, but just their relationship didn't quite click for me. I guess I should probably talk about what this book is. It is a adult romance. I guess that's all you really need to say. It's an adult romance. So you can kind of guess what goes on. But it was a little slow for me. It doesn't really start to get, into the kind of steamy parts until about halfway to 70% into the book. So I really like my romances to be fast-paced. I like the relationships to be more fun and quippy. And while I do appreciate, seeing that kind of disability rep, I just like really fluffy romances where I don't have to think about things. But I did enjoy this book. I am really glad I read it. So the next book I read that finished out 2020 for me was Brave New World. This book is garbage, and I don't think anyone should read it. And the fact that it's considered a classic is ridiculous to me because it is a garbage book about garbage people, and it's just not even fun garbage. It's just smelly, stinky, trash garbage. I hate it. I actually have a review of it, a rant review, that I have a link above and in the description. So you can go watch me rant about it if you want, but I'm done talking about it. I hate this book. The first book I read for 2021 was Ready Player 2. This is also a trash book, but like I enjoyed reading it because I'm kind of a trash person. Like it's definitely just, it's not a good book. It's just a popcorn book. I mean, if you enjoy like 80s memorabilia and you're kind of willing to get over whiny and kind of creepy protagonists, like it's not a bad read. I mean, I'm not really recommending that anyone should go out and read it, but if you enjoyed the first one, I mean, the second one is not any different at all, so you'll probably enjoy the second one. And I also talked about it in my rant review of Brave New World. The first audiobook that I listened to in 2021 was How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. This was written by Dr. Walter Rodney. He was a Guyanese scholar and political activist in like the 60s and 70s. The first part of this book, the preface, is a short little essay on kind of his life, how he grew up, why he went into academia, and a bit about his political activism and his eventual assassination. And then the rest of the book is kind of a case study on different African nations and how they specifically, that specific nation was affected by European and later American imperialism, and how that kind of stalled the growth, I guess the economic growth that nation did have, and how it actually altered the economic and social structure of that nation or group. And then kind of like zooms back out and talks about the African continent as a whole and how that's affected, just a domino from that initial kind of imperialism into what we know as Africa today. So I think it was a really, really fascinating book, and I think it's a great historical kind of intro into African economies and history. I mean, I don't know about other people, but I certainly did not get a whole lot of African education just in general in my public school history classes and whatnot. So I thought it was a really, really interesting book. And for being as kind of academically technical as it is, Dr. Rodney does make it very easy to digest for non-technical people that way, I suppose. So even though it is a very heavy book, I think anybody could pick it up and, get what they need to out of it. The next book I read was American Royals. This was really fun. I really enjoyed this book. So it is about what would happen if George Washington had been crowned a king rather than a president. So it is the current day, and it's George Washington's line down to the new king and his daughters and son and kind of their shenanigans. So I think if you're, interested in stuff like The Crown and whatnot, and you kind of like the political, scandalous intrigue of royal families, it's really fun because it's an American royal family, and Americans are really good at political intrigue and scandal. So to just add royals in there, it's just a blast. The next book I read, I actually have a physical copy of, and I grabbed the wrong one. Okay, so here's the right one. So the next book I read was Scorpion's Tale. This is the newest installment of the Nora Kelly series by Preston and Child. So the Nora Kelly series follows this archaeologist, Nora Kelly, who works with an FBI agent named Corey Swan to solve different mysteries. So this is another one, murder mystery in the Southwest that ends up leading to kind of a deeper conspiracy. So it's very fun, very fast paced, very cowboy standoffs, and I don't know, it's really fun. I really like this series and these books. So if you are interested in checking out Nora Kelly, I would recommend starting with Thunderhead, which is the first book 0 in the Nora Kelly series. So I have a review for that and also a review for this if you're interested in checking that out. So the next audiobook I picked up was one I already kind of talked about, but My Life in France by Julia Child. So it's an autobiography of Julia Child, the famous American chef who wrote the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And it's actually written by her niece, but I guess with the amount of interviews and stuff they did, it just says it was written by Julia Child. But like I said, this was an audiobook that me and my boyfriend listened to together. We had watched the movie Julie and Julia, which is a fun, cute little movie that we saw on Netflix, and got kind of interested in Julia Child and her life. So we picked up her autobiography, and this woman is crazy accomplished and just incredible to read about. She worked for the OSS during World War II and invented shark repellent so that the sharks wouldn't set off the mines that they had in the ocean, and just lived an incredible life and a very, very interesting, hardworking woman. So it's really fun to read about. So if you are interested, I would highly, highly recommend it. The next book I read was Axiom's End, the debut novel by Lindsay Ellis. And this was a solid 3 for me. Like, there's nothing wrong with this book. I didn't read it at a good time, so I ended up not really enjoying it the way I think I would have had I picked it up at a different time. It follows a young woman as she gets caught up in this kind of government conspiracy with aliens. She ends up becoming the translator for this alien guy, and they get kind of taken all over and doing a bunch of stuff. And I don't know, like I said, there's nothing wrong with the book. It just didn't really grip me, so it took me a while to get through it, and I just didn't really enjoy it that much, which like I said is a shame. If you are interested in kind of sci-fi and aliens, I would recommend this book. The audiobook I listened to next, I think, is a big part of the reason I didn't enjoy Axiom's End, and that is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. So I think definitely having the comparison of a debut sci-fi novel to a more well-established author of sci-fi, I think wasn't really fair on Axiom's End. Dark Matter is so intriguing and so much fun. I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not going to say any sort of synopsis because I went into it totally blind. I didn't even read the back of the book. I knew nothing about this book, and I think my enjoyment was heightened by that fact that I knew nothing about it going in. So if you are any sort of sci-fi fan, I would definitely recommend Dark Matter if you haven't read it already. I mean, it's like a super popular book, so I finally read it. I really enjoyed it. My next audiobook is a bit niche. I don't know if very many people are going to appreciate it the way I did, but it is the autobiography of Kathryn Janeway. Oh my gosh, I loved this book so much. So I am a huge Star Trek Voyager fan, And a big part of that for me was Captain Kathryn Janeway. So to read this autobiography of the character's life was just so incredible to me. And it is voiced by the actress who played Kathryn Janeway in the show. And so it feels so real, and it just makes me really feel like I'm living in, you know, the 24th century? Makes me feel like I'm living in the future, and like I could go enroll in Starfleet and go be a captain of a starship myself. And it just, I loved it. And it's just incredible. Like I said, this was a 5-star read for me, but I think for most people it would probably end up being pretty boring because it's a very kind of stereotypical story. And if you're not already interested in the Star Trek kind of universe, you're probably not gonna enjoy it that much. But if you are a Star Trek fan, I would highly recommend checking it out. So my next physical read was for the Shelf This book club hosted by Is Bailey Reading. And it is In the Woods by Tana French. So again, this is another book that there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not my thing. So a solid 3 stars. Like there's nothing particularly wrong with this book. Like it is a good book, but it's just not my cup of tea. So it is a detective novel. It's definitely not a thriller. So if you see this being listed as a thriller, it is not that. It is just a straight up detective true crime fiction novel. It's very slow. It's very methodical. I think it's very realistic to probably what a real investigation looks like, but it's just, I didn't really like it. This detective was himself involved in a child murder back in the 80s. We see that and then flash forward to his life where he is now a detective and gets called back to another child murder in his hometown where the first one came from, and he goes through the investigation and does investigation things, and that's the whole thing. It's a thick book too. I know like it doesn't look big in like the paperback, but it's like a big, many words in this novel. So I don't know, if you're into kind of true crime stuff, I think you would probably enjoy this. My next audiobook was Unbroken, the biography of the Olympians Louis Zamperini. And this was another incredible book to listen to. I know I always say I'm tired of World War II stuff, but I just keep picking up World War II stuff. So this follows Louis Zamperini's life from his childhood in California through to his time in World War II as a POW in a Japanese POW camp. And then later his life after the war and his struggle with alcoholism and his eventual turn to religion. And it's an incredible story. Again, another incredibly long book, but I was so interested in every part of this man's life. Like he is a crazy human. He is built different. Like he literally built different. I guess one of the reasons he was such a fast runner had something to do with the way his hips moved, like genetically. So he just basically had a genetic advantage over a lot of his competition and the way he ran. And then later on, he was a part of a crew on a bomber. And during just kind of a typical like flight to one of the Pacific Islands, their plane ends up crashing and everyone dies except for the pilot, Louis, and like a private who is just hitching a ride. And so the 3 of them end up in a raft in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for 47 days. And Louis and the pilot survived. The private unfortunately passed away. But I mean, it's insane. The kind of the general theme that I think the author goes throughout this book is one of Louis Zamperini's kind of mottos, where he says, "A moment of pain is worth a lifetime of glory." And I think he went through more than a couple moments of pain. And I think it's supposed to be kind of an inspiring story of, you know, if this guy can go through all of that, like you can go out and do your thing. But all I got out of it is like, this guy was just built different. Like he is a different breed of human than the rest of us, because there's no way I can't imagine. But I don't know, an incredible book. It was also made into a movie by Angelina Jolie, so I'll probably check out that movie at some point soon. Next book I read was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of this book. I mean, I had seen all the hype on BookTube and whatnot, and then I read it and I got the hype. Like, definite 5 stars for me. I loved this book. I have a review for it, so I'm not gonna talk too much about synopsis and whatever here, but I think if you are in like your mid-20s to early 30s, you know, quarter life crisis era, I think you should definitely read this. And even if you're not, I mean, it's just a super fun, intriguing, thought-provoking read that I enjoyed immensely. So good. The next book I read was actually a short story, Galatea by Madeline Miller, the same woman who wrote The Song of Achilles and Circe. So this is another Greek mythology retelling, and it was different than I expected based on The Song of Achilles and Circe. It's a lot darker and a lot angrier. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's only 20 pages long. Like, you can easily, you know, whip through this on a lunch break. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. So, I mean, if you are kind of interested in that kind of genre, I would recommend it, but just know going in, it is very raw and angry. And the last thing I want to talk about is Lore Olympus Season 1, the webcomic hosted on Webtoon. And this is huge. Like, I feel like everyone's at least seen this webcomic in some form or another. It's so popular, and for good reason. It is so good. It is a Persephone and Hades retelling, and it's very fun. The artwork is beautiful, and the storyline it's a little intense. I mean, there are definite trigger warnings throughout the story, but the author does a really good job of listing the trigger warnings on each what she calls episodes. If you do need those, she does have them available, and I think it's so good. It's so good. It's one of my favorite things to pick up on. And I did start reading it like in 2018, and then I caught up to where it was and kind of dropped off. So it was really fun to go back and reread and catch up through, you know, the first season and up into the second season where she is now, so I can kind of, you know, be there for when the new episodes come out. So that is everything I read in the first quarter of 2021. So thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.